I'd like to thank the Process Art Discovery audience for joining me today. I'm Lynda Norman, and I'm a watercolor artist in the beautiful province of British Columbia. Today, we're going to readdress the card pull, but this time we'll do it on some paper. It's been quite a week, quite a month so far. It's only the, not even the middle of the month, and but it's my birthday month. And thank you so much for everybody who sent along birthday greetings. I appreciate that so much. It's been a couple of weeks full of lots of treats and fun things to do. And I had an opportunity yesterday to have lunch with one of our subscribers, Donna, Grandma Donna. What a beautiful, beautiful woman. We had such a wonderful time chatting over lunch. And Donna's been an artist for some time, and she's traveled all over the States and lived in many places there with her husband's work and whatnot. And she brought me these, and I just wanted to share them with you. This is a little winter scene from when she lived in Virginia. And I just love how beautiful and soft and subtle that is. And I'm just so pleased I can hardly wait to frame it. And then this is one that I think is just absolutely exquisite as well. And she does paint in other mediums as well, but her watercolors are just exquisite. And I just I'm inspired. I might have to give this a go. I've not yet tried a clear glass jar. I know that's something to aspire to. So Donna, well done, and thank you so much for connecting. I really do appreciate that from all of you. And it makes every day, not just my birthday and not just my birthday month, special. So again, thank you so much for everything that you share with me. Your comments mean the world. And speaking of comments, I have a lot of people who are seem to be quite interested in learning more about vignettes. Of course, we'll do that I think in the next series of videos. But the card pull, and I've done that before with paint straight from the tube with a plastic card and put that onto a canvas, which is really a fun way to experience that. And the reason I started doing it on canvas is because for a while I was seeing people wanting larger pieces of art. And as you might know, a standard piece of watercolor paper is 22 inches by 30 inches, and that didn't quite seem large enough. So with the canvas, I was able to go basically as big as I could reach. So 3 feet by 4 feet is the largest canvas I could do that on. But I do like to do that card pull on paper as well, as long as you've got enough moisture on the page for your paints to move, and as long as you're using a paper that is strong enough to deal with that water and not break down or buckle too much. That's one of the reasons I do love a block. Blocks are glued, several sheets of paper glued on all sides. Most of them have an opening in the center at the top, some at the corners, some on the sides. I think usually this one says open right there, so you know that's where when your painting is dried, you can put the palette knife in it and gently move it around. If you were to try to remove it when the paper was still damp, the paper's, as tough as it seems, is still pretty fragile, and that could actually tear that paper and ruin your painting. And also leaving it on the block until it's dry means that it's going to flatten right back down to where it originally was, and so that's a bonus. You don't have to worry about ironing it or pressing it. I'm just going to move this out of the way, and we'll get started. And recently I did get some beautiful tubes of the Daniel Smith Granulating. I'm still waiting for one more tube to come, and I think it's called, I don't even know what it's called anymore. This one here is called Lunar Red Rock, and the other one is called Lunar Earth. So I think the Lunar Earth is more of a yellow or browner tone. So I just thought it would be fun to try the card pull and watch how these granulating colors, super granulating colors, will move on the page. So we are using Academy watercolor paper, rough. 100% cotton, acid-free Baohong. You can get this online, Amazon, Temu, any of those places. It's a block, 300 GSM. A lot of people get confused. 300 GSM means grams per square meter, which is a weight, a universal weight used when they're shipping paper and measuring big reams of it. Really what you're looking for is usually it says 140 pound. That's the translation. 300 GSM is not 300 pound. 300 pound paper is very much thicker, almost like a cardboard. And 300 pound paper will say 640 GSM. Okay, so if you're confused, go online. There's probably a chart there that you could find, just so that you know the difference. The 300 pound paper is going to be much more expensive than the 300 GSM or the 140 pound. So that's that. There's lots of brands available now that supply 100% cotton paper, acid-free. I think that's important when you're painting, when you're learning to paint. Unless you're doing greeting cards and smaller things, I would really encourage you to try to go with 100% cotton paper. So, enough chit-chat. Let's get the water on the page. And similar to when we do this on a canvas, I'm going to put a fair bit of water for the sky. I want the pigments to be able to move up into this sky area. And this will be a landscape, of course. That's how we roll here. And I think probably about 2/3 of the way down, 3/4 of the way down, I'm going to leave a bit of a drier spot. I'm not going to worry about that being totally saturated here, and it might be a little bit uneven. I do that because I love how when your card pulls across the paper at a light pressure, it sort of jumps across the little bumps on the top of the page, and it gives you a very interesting texture. So if you sit back, the way the lighting is here, I can sit back and I can sort of see where there's a little bit of a line there. It doesn't have to be a huge line, but just a little bit of a dry spot. And I'm just going to let that soak in for a moment. Sometimes I just even do this just to get the water on there kind of randomly. I don't want it to look pre-designed. So while that's soaking in and settling, I'm going to get these colors on. This is a piece of photo paper. The shiny side is got an emulsion, as I've explained before. The emulsion is made for photos so that when you put it in your printer, it grabs the ink and sets it into the photo. We don't want that because the emulsion, when you wet it, gets kind of sticky and it'll mix with your paints. So I'm going to set this off to the side, and I'm going to add my colors. And I've got, in my Lunar collection, my Daniel Smith Lunar paints, I've got Lunar Blue, Lunar Violet, and Lunar Red Rock. Now that's kind of an interesting color. It might be very pretty with a landscape. But for my sky, I'm going to make sure I've got my Lunar Blue and my Lunar Violet. And I think I want the blue to be uppermost in the sky. And so I'm going to put a dot on there about the size of what? I don't even know what that would be. A little smaller than the size of a dime. I don't need too much because we don't have a really huge piece of paper. So the Lunar Blue I'm putting at the top dot, and then just fairly close to that I'm going to put the Lunar Violet. I'm thinking the sky will be, maybe have a little bit of a purpley glow towards the land more. And I brought out of my other collection my Undersea Green. It's not part of the Lunar series, but it is a beautiful color and it is granulating. It does some wonderful things on its own. So I'm going to put a little bit of that on there. And the quinacridone gold I brought out as well because, as you know, it's my favorite. But I'm not going to put that on yet because it's a bit bossy. So we'll leave that out because if I put it on there now and it gets in the wrong spot, it's going to create its own stage to show off, and we don't really want that yet until we find out where our design's going. And then I've got this Lunar Red Rock, Daniel Smith Lunar Red Rock. And I'm just going to give that hardly any. Whoa, that's you know what? I'm going to put that in my palette over here because I have that in my little palette. So the excess. All right, so I've got lunar blue, lunar violet, some undersea green, and some lunar red rock. I'm going to grab a little card. I have a whole collection of old cards, and I like to sort of feel them. This one's quite a bit stiffer. I think for a larger area, a stiffer one would work well. But I think I'm going to go with something like this. It's got a bit of flex to it. Oh, and look, I've got some lunar red rock right there already. It's chomping at the bit to get started. So with this process, your card, your paints, I'm just going to scoop them up just like that. So they're pretty thick on the card. And I've still got a fair bit of water happening on the page. I just don't want too many puddles. So I'm just going to make sure it's moved around a little bit. The card is going to apply the paint similar to a brush, but we're not going to work it in. We're going to allow it to sit on the surface of the paper and just find its own way. So if I start about here, where I think maybe my landfall might want to be, rather than dead center. Actually, I'm going to go up a little bit higher. I will make my sky. So I'm going to I'm barely, I usually don't want to leave the page. Barely touching the surface. I'm just introducing this paint to the page, and then I'm going to scoop up again from the other side, and I'm just going to go back and do a similar thing. I like to give a little variety. I want to avoid doing the windshield washer kind of movement. Now I've got the top thing going on there. I'm going to turn my card sideways, and I just want to introduce some of these colors to the bottom part of my page. And then we're going to let things, I've got some paint still on there. I'm going to try to see if I can get that onto my page. There we go. And we'll scrape up whatever we've got left. Oops, dropped it. And you can see where the pigments are moving through the water. If you press hard, you're going to scratch your paper. Like I said, it seems pretty tough, this beautiful cotton paper, but it is only paper. So if you're pressing too hard, you're going to scratch your paper and leave marks. At this point, I want to just sit for a moment, and I want to see what the paints are doing. Watch where they're going. The lunar blue is becoming quite light in spots, a beautiful, almost like a Prussian blue it feels. It's very pretty. And I've got some heavier spots of the undersea green. A little bit of that violet has come down in through here, and I really do love how the granulation is happening between the lunar red rock and the blue and the green at the bottom here. And because the page is buckling, that's going to happen no matter what, it's almost giving the paint and the moisture just a bit of direction there. Now, if we take, I think I want to take, I'll take my Hake brush. And I want it's going to be damp, but it's going to be not dripping. Because I can see here there's some thicker points of color, and I just want to try to soften those just a tiny bit, and then I'll give it a spray of water and just see where things will go from there. I can see, there's some beautiful things forming in the middle here. I think I want to avoid having stripes, of course. So let's see what we can do with our just fine mister. At this point, I don't want to add a lot of water. I want things to be sort of subtle and be able to move on their own. So if I turn the page and apply the water specifically to some of those heavier bits, we'll see what happens. And then we'll tip it back again. And the mountains and the hillsides are forming. Again, when I'm going in with a brush, I really want to try to avoid making specific brush marks. And then we'll let some of that water maybe just flow right off the side. Give it a chance to move. This is going to be a very abstract-y kind of effort. And then, as with, anytime you're using these super granulating paints, if you can let them be and let the granulation happen. But I can see here where the undersea green was actually a bit thicker coming out of the tube. So that's interesting. So you have to keep an eye on that. So I'm just going to take some of that and maybe just loosely apply some of that a little further down. Now I can start to shape maybe a bit more of a landscape. Just with a loose brush, nothing specific. Let's get some tree shape maybe happening there. Again, because the page is buckling, we're getting a bit of a dip in the middle. So we're going to wait a bit and see what we can see. So this is the part that I really love is now that the paints are able to move on their own, they're granulating and they're moving into each other and creating these incredible organic shapes. And I think if I just add some moisture there and take a bit of it off. If the paint is too thick, it's not going to be able to move, right? It's just going to be too harsh. And because things have faded out in the middle here because of that dip in the water, I think what I want to do is maybe just encourage some of these shapes to come down and fill in a bit of that dip. Okay. This purple in the sky is really quite beautiful. And if we tip and we move and we let things just flow. Now this is interesting because unfortunately that's dead center. So what are we going to do with that? Let's see if we can encourage some of that puddle out of there. And again, we don't really want your mountains and everything to come to a center right in the middle of the page either. So I just want to sort of encourage that to move off to the side a little bit. I don't want to touch this because it is quite exquisite and quite beautiful. And there's a bit of heavy pigment there. I can't even tell what color that is. I think it's the lunar violet. And I'm just going to add that down in this area here, pardon me, to just soften things up a little bit and get some color. Because the page is damp, it's going to sort of flow out. So as it sits, you can almost see this fantasy landscape come into play. Some magical things happening here. I don't even know what you'd call that. They're very organic, root-like, I suppose. I'm not sure. But I think that's quite exquisite. I think because the page was already buckling, where I was trying to be light across, some of the points that were sitting higher up was where a lot of the pigment landed. So I'm just going to soften a bit of that out. And then with your dampish paper towel, and I don't care that this has got a lot of pigment on it, it's the right level of dampness. I'm just going to go in and we'll see if we can't just pull away a little bit of some of that color to make it look almost like a misty fantasy kind of effect. Barely touching the surface of the page. And I can already see in my mind's eye, you know, a bit of a lake area forming here, and then perhaps we'll make a slight little waterfall, and it will come down and flow it down through here. So I'm just going to allow that just again to just move a little bit on its own. Adjusting a tiny bit. If I see blooms happening or some hard edges that perhaps aren't going to be as effective, I'm going to preserve that because it's quite magical on its own, and this whole area down here I think is quite beautiful. So we're going to let it dry just a little longer. This is quite wet in the middle here. So if we just take a bit of the surface water off, the pigment can still move. I think in hindsight, I probably would not have put that lunar red rock in there. Although it's making some pretty incredible movement on its own in this granulation part. And I want to avoid it to almost be too symmetrical. So having said that, let's take a tiny bit of this, see if we can pick it up on the brush, and just introduce a tiny bit of it. Often these tend to come out looking like faces, and kind of don't want that either, right? So let's all right, so we're almost dry. The granulation is going to continue to happen. I could force more of that by adding Chinese white. Actually, is one of the colors that I've found when you're working with granulating paints really helps to enhance that spidery look that the paints so often will do. But I don't think I'm going to add that to this painting. But it is an option for you if you want to try, play around with that. And while that's drying, I wanted to tell you a little bit about this sponge that I found. Whoops. It's a Borchiani Bonazzi. It's a super high absorbency sponge, very fine textured, so it doesn't have the holes in it. But when it's damp, when it's wet, if you're, let's see, if you have a brush that has a lot of water on it, it will take a lot of it off. So, for dabbing your brush when you're taking it out of your water, great option for that. I love it. And then once you have done that, and your sponge is a bit dampish, you can certainly use it for lifting even. If we wanted to have a bit of a lift here, for example, we could lift some of this paint just slightly out with it, which is kind of an interesting concept. So rather than use a brush, you can go in, especially for bigger pieces, you can definitely use the, and because it's damp, you can use it as a brush and as a tool for softening edges. It's really quite interesting. One thing you want to do is make sure that it's washed out after you've used it, of course. When it dries, it becomes as hard as a rock. It's quite interesting. And the more you use it, the more absorbent it becomes, apparently. So I'm just learning about that. And I think we may be able to go in now with a bright. Little bright brush. This is what I use to carve out little edges. The paper is still a bit on the damp side, so I'm going to just have to watch it. I don't want to add more water with this brush, so I have to be very conscious of how much water is on the page and the dampness level of the brush. You can do this even once the painting is dry, because watercolor, most colors are liftable. And as with horizons, again, tendency for us is to use the windshield wiper motion or curve our horizons. That's not always the case. I think if you're looking at something from a distance, you want your horizon to be indicated, but if you were to do this, it throws the perspective off. So short strokes, and vary them in where they're placed on the page. So some a little bit higher and some a little bit lower will help you to sort of get a sense that shape and that contour of that water's edge or forest edge or whatever you're making on your horizon is definitely, you know, moving around and changing levels according to your perspective. With these brushes, you can also pull out slightly from the colors that are on the side, just to cause sort of a reflection effect in your waters, or in your shadows under trees, that kind of thing. So you can, hopefully you can see how, you know, how just those few strokes made such a difference in the depth of this one little corner. I'm not going to even touch this granulating part here because the paints have already done that for me. They've created these fabulous shapes, rocks, bushes. Their own shadows have appeared because of the pigmentation in the paints, and I'm really quite enjoying that. So I'm going to carry that down, and I said maybe we'd try to make this into a little waterfall. So let's see if we can't bring a little bit. I'm going to dampen my brush. Bring a little bit of this down because the page is drying a bit now. I just want my brush to be barely damp. And if we have some darker spots here to indicate that there's maybe a rock ledge for the water to sort of tumble over. And if we bring it down slightly this way to indicate that there's a flow of water, and then go across it this way, just ever so slightly, to bring those reflections and shadows out into the surface of the lake or pond or whatever we have here. There's some interesting little green bits from the undersea green there. I'm not going to worry much about those right now. I'm going to let them sit until I can decide what I want them to be in the design. They might just get to stay there as a part of a reflection. So let's leave those for now. Now this might be an area, if you chose to go in with your white afterwards and just add a few little white dots to indicate maybe some turbulence in the water. I want to be careful. My tendency always is, again, to do the curve with the arms. So shorter strokes help to keep that straight often. If it's a larger area, I often will just take a ruler. I've got this nice little clear ruler, and once things are dry, I wouldn't want to put this on there when that's damp, but once it's dry, if I was, you know, wanting to indicate a lengthy horizon, I would use this as a marker, but I wouldn't draw a line along the whole way. I would just, in certain areas, just indicate that that's the level of change where the land meets the sky, or the sea meets the sky, or whatever's happening there. All right, so this is I think all I'm going to do up in this corner for now. You can always go back. When you step away from your work, and I've said this lots before, take a photo. Step away, go have a cup of tea or whatever, and sit down 10 minutes later, an hour later, whenever, and have a look at that photo. And if there is anything that definitely needs to be changed, you'll see it. It'll pop right out. And again, here we are with another level of background, sort of, another series of mountainous shapes, land shapes. And so we'll just indicate here and there that that's what's happening. On this side, I'm just going to move this because it's going to be, if there's any paint left on it, it's going to be stuck on everything. When we get to this side, you can see where the granulation has moved both up and down. So you've got automatic shadows in your water reflections. And so you don't really want to cut those off completely and cut them in half. So again, just a little lift with your paintbrush. Rinse it, dry it off, and pull away a tiny bit of color. This part that's fallen down that looks like a reflection or a shadow, if you just give it a touch here and there, it will help to give you that sense that there's some water flow happening in front of it. And it's subtle. It's very subtle. And if you're working gently and you're conscious of the water on your brush, you can go back. Sometimes these marks aren't instantaneous. You have to go back again. It depends again on the level of wetness on your paper, whether the pigments that are there are going to fall back into that space that you've removed. So you may have to go back in at the odd time and redefine some of these areas. If you cut into an area slightly, it gives you that sort of indentation, like almost like there's a little bay or something happening in the back. So I kind of like that. I think that's kind of fun. And again, it just gives you more levels of depth. All right. If you didn't like this white area in the middle part here, you could certainly take a soft brush, barely damp, and encourage some of the colors to go through. I don't mind the white. I think that's kind of fun, and I can enhance these little satellite pieces that are sitting out here, just and bring them a little further into the design, just to soften things out a little bit. And we can hook some of those up, maybe bringing that green from this little blob that's here, and just softly working it into the rest of the page. Another thing I've noticed quite often, because I'm doing a lot of teaching these days in person, is that everyone's perception of wetness and how much water to use is so very different. And most often we're afraid to use as much water or as much pigment as we should. When I say a damp paper towel, I like to get the whole thing damp so that it's not got any harsh corners or edges, and I wouldn't be able to squeeze water out of it, but if I was to squeeze it, it would hold its squeezed shape. And that way I can form it into little pillows. I can make the shapes that are going to help to pick up the water and the pigment off the page when I dab. And that can be used also as a buffer. You know, if you want to soften a few edges, you can see it's just barely picking up paint, but sometimes that's all that's needed. You know, if we're making subtle changes, we don't need to have, you know, big swatches taken out of what we're doing. I think I'm pretty happy with the way this has turned out. It's an abstract landscape. The granulation didn't happen maybe as much as it would have had we been specifically adding gobs and gobs of paint and lots of water, the way we typically would do a mysterious granulating landscape. But I love that this has got it's got little pockets of beauty. It's like you could take a little fantasy walk through, or you know, ride through on your canoe or something, and explore some of these areas. You know, maybe there's some mystical caves or something happening here in some of these areas, and it's certainly a fun way to just play with some paint. And yeah, I think I'm at a place now where I would step away, take that photo, go have my tea, and come back in a little while and see what other little finer edges I would like to add, perhaps. So if you can hear the sound in the back, yep, that's our Maggie. That's our grand dog. She's visiting for the weekend, and she'd rather be down here painting with me than up there, obviously. So I'm going to go and rescue her. I really do appreciate you being here. If you like what you've seen, please subscribe to the channel or head on over to the members area.